This is draft season. Hello, everybody. I am John Schmeelk, joined by Tony Pauline. Happy Labor Day weekend, everybody. Just a heads up, we're recording this on Sunday morning, so we're not going to have anything on the LSU USC game on Sunday night. And then the second half of the show is going to be our interview with Eric Galko, who runs the East West Shrine game. Tony, I kind of talked about this. We don't want to overreact too much to what we see the first few weeks of the college season. So we have a couple of these interviews, Tony, that we're going to latch onto these shows. We'll talk about some of the key games, some of the key matchups, but we don't want to make too much out of what we see from some of the guys we're keeping an eye on this year, just in their first couple college games of the year.
Well, you don't really want to overreact to any single game. That's a bad thing people get into. They see a guy play, oh, he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's a lot of film on these guys. Though there were some outstanding performances yesterday in week one by some really good NFL prospects. I mean, the Arizona receiver, Tritorio McMillan, had 304 yards and four touchdown receptions. That guy is a potential top four pick. He reminds me of Calvin Johnson minus the 4.37 speed. He's that natural. He's that fluid. Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, who was a real good next level prospect, 267 yards and six TDs against Georgia Southern. You know, great for him. If he keeps that up, it'll be in the Heisman Trophy candidacy. But that performance alone is not going to help his draft stock. But he is a real good NFL prospect.
Yeah, I think we saw a couple of really good running back performances over the course of the weekend. A better running back class, that's something we'll certainly address as we go along. Draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, Tony, I'll let you pick the game. Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, I think we start off. A lot of these teams got off to slow starts. I mean, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, they got off to slow starts, and then they really kicked it into gear.
Even Michigan, right? On Saturday night, slow start.
Exactly. Let's start off with the first one, Georgia, Clemson. I mean, first of all, from a college football perspective, you can see why the programs are going in different directions because of just the sheer speed and athleticism that Georgia is able to put on the field. I mean, some of their defensive players just really wow me. These guys are really good. Starting with their junior linebacker, who was a reserve last season, who had a terrific game. Let me pull it up here. I'm sorry. Jalen Walker, who led the team in tackles, led the team in sacks, led the team in tackles for loss. Reminds me of a Nolan Smith type. He's going to get a little bit bigger. Like I said, he was a reserve last year, number 7. But when you watch the film, you can see flashes during the 2023 season. He seems to have pulled it all together, was all over the field making plays yesterday. Their pass rusher, Mikael Williams, seems to be rounding into form. Again, he was the guy who last year, very explosive player, can come out of a three-point stance, can stand over tackle, up until the chop block, which then they had to take him out of the game yesterday, which got called for a penalty. He really started to. He basically asserted himself. Wasn't great in the stats column, but had a lot of impact plays.
It's funny, Tony, just real quick, you mentioned these Georgia guys. Every time I saw a Georgia player make a play in the backfield, I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy's just bigger than everybody else that's on the field. It's like they have just the best athletes in college football. It's crazy.
Bigger and faster.
Yeah.
I mean, their team speed is just like, wow. It's like Clemson was going half speed compared to Georgia.
And Clemson has some good athletes too, by the way. That's why it's so striking.
They got a lot of good players on their defensive line. Now, remember, all of their defensive linemen are now in the NFL. They were drafted or signed as priority free agents. When I say all of them, the starters. DeMonte Capehart, the big defensive tackle, Peyton Page. These are guys that are highly thought of in the scouting community and really, I think, asserted themselves well, especially in the first half against a very good Georgia offensive line. But their offense wasn't able to move the ball, and they just broke down. But these are guys Capehart and Page, and even Trey Williams to watch moving forward from the Clemson point of view.
And I think we should mention one of the defender for Georgia before I want to talk to you about a couple of their offensive players, Tony Malachi Stark. So I know both of us think is probably going to be the best safety in this class. Maybe he'll challenge as a potential top 10 pick. Boy, he showed that athleticism going almost horizontal on an interception, playing man-to-man outside. Just a heck of a catch.
He is a big, fast safety who can cover. When you watch the film, there are times where they put him over the slot receiver, and he's not a liability. I mean, he holds his own. Came into the season with basically near first round grades from scouts, which is pretty good for a junior safety.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, I want to jump on Georgia's offense here. Carson Beck, Tony, and he was my favorite quarterback heading into this year, from what I watched of the guys last year, because he makes these throws, these deep in cuts in the middle of the field where he just seems to put these balls into small areas and they look like NFL throws to me. I thought he was fine. I didn't think he was spectacular. But then Nate Frazier, the running back, with Trevor Etienne not playing, violation of school rules, correct, if I'm not mistaken. He didn't have a chance to play, but Nate Frazier took advantage of it.
Yeah, they didn't really say why he was on the sidelines. So I think that fade pattern, that corner pattern to Colby Young, the big receiver, the transfer from Miami, who's a potential late round pick, that was a very impressive pass because, like you said, it was in the corner of the end zone. It was put where only Young could make the reception, and he did for a touchdown. And that's when the game started to get out of hand and started to get away from Clemson. But I agree with you. He wasn't spectacular, but he makes a lot of really nice throws. And if he's able to multiply that and to do that on a consistent basis, he's going to vault up draft boards.
He can also move okay. Like he's not a mobile. I wouldn't classify him as an athletic mobile quarterback, Tony, but we saw him run for that first down in the first half of the game. He's not he isn't Aiden O'Connell back there either. He is a little bit more juice than that.
It's at the point now where all quarterbacks that are going to be top 45 picks have some sort of mobility. I mean, that's the way it is. It's going to be either guys that can make plays with their legs or guys that are able to elude defenders, even if they're 225, 230 pounds.
What do you think of Nate Frazier, the running back?
I mean, he was solid. I didn't think the running game really was that great. I was a little bit surprised by how it took that Georgia offensive line in the first half to really get it together because they have got some terrific talent at offensive guard as well as tackle. I think we'll have to wait and see as the year goes on.
By the way, the folks can hear I got my 7-year-old and 2-year-old playing in the room next to me. So if there's any background noise, that's why. They're having a great time. They're having a great time if that makes people any happier about it. Let's go to Miami here, Tony, and I think the conversation has to start with Cam Ward, who is just dynamite.
Wow. I mean, wow. It's like you would have thought that Cam Ward had run that offense for 5 years, that he was a fifth-year senior in the Miami offense, and he had those guys playing and practicing around him for the past 5 years. I mean, the poise, the control, the way he was always in command of the situation, the patience. Now, he's got some technical things that he's got to work on. I mean, throwing the ball across his body is not good. There are some questionable passes. I love the fact that he's able to change his arm release to get rid of the ball, to get it into his targets. But I mean, you can tell Cam Ward has got it going on between the ears. He's got to improve his pass placement. We talked about Carson Beck's pass placement. Cam Ward's is not the same. It's not that he is inaccurate. It's that he has receivers adjusting backwards or leaving their feet. He doesn't throw receivers free, I guess is the best term to say that everybody uses, which he has to improve on. But you can't come away not blown away by what you saw yesterday with Cam Ward. To go into the swamp, which is one of the most hostile places in all of college football. If you look, I wrote an article about it at Sportskeeda about how, this was a must-win for Billy Napier, the Florida coach, who's probably going to get fired, if not by the end of the season, during the season, because you look at that end of the Florida schedule from the beginning of October through November, and it's absolutely killer. And Cam Ward just went in there and just tore them to shreds. I mean, it was a thing of beauty, and good for Cam Ward. I mean, you talked about how we're going to have Eric Galko on. If you remember, we spoke to Galko last year at the Shrine Bowl about Cam Ward, who was going to go back, and then he was invited to the Shrine Bowl, and then he decided to enter the NFL draft, and then he went back into the transfer portal. And you know what? Week 1 so far, it seems to have worked out for him.
And this could be this year's kind of Jaden Daniels deal, right? You go back for another year, you figure everything out, and then who knows where you wind up. We know he's got the physical size, the arm strength, all the physical characteristics. If you can put together between the ears like you're talking about, Tony, refine some of the passing game stuff. I think I could see people talking about in the way we talked about Anthony Richardson a little bit a couple years ago coming out. Obviously, Richardson a lot less experience. Ward has played a lot more games, obviously, but just a quarterback that has all the tools you want.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he's further along the line mentally than Richardson was. I don't think
Yeah.
Richardson was a guy who just, it was hit or miss with Richardson. It was feast or famine. But what I saw yesterday from Cam, and you saw it last year at Washington State. It's not like this came out of nowhere. There were times, really, the past 2 years at Washington State, where you saw this big, strong arm, athletic guy who, at times would make some questionable passes. I thought at times he needed to improve his accuracy, which I think he still does, needs to improve his pass placement. But this is just not out of the blue. It's the fact that he played for Washington State. And let's be honest, Washington State was on at 10:30 at night. Nobody watched them. You got to see it nationally. And, that game yesterday is probably one of the toughest games Miami is going to have on its schedule. So really the sky is the limit right now for Cam Ward.
Xavier Restrepo, a nice game in that game from Miami. Anything else jump out at you, Tony?
Yeah, Francisco Moagoa, the linebacker. He's probably a late round guy, 6'1.5", 241. Not a 3-down guy, but just someone who plays lights out, someone who plays over his head, will sell out on the blitz, force the action a lot. Again, you look at more of like a day 3 pass rush specialist. Would like to see him complete his game if he can, but he showed really well yesterday in that game.
All right, let's jump over to the Penn State game. They roll over West Virginia, and again a little bit of a slow start, but they wind up getting rolling there, Tony. And boy, new offense there, and it showed. Drew Holler looked like a different quarterback, very effective. He was really good, and then their running back Nicholas Singleton was very explosive.
Yeah, at times. I mean, I think when both games were on at the same time, except the Penn State West Virginia game had a 3-hour delay because of weather, so you really only got to see the first half of that game. But that game was on at the same time, so as the Clemson game, so I was able to compare and contrast Drew Allard to Carson Beck, and I thought that Allard in the game yesterday, in the first half anyway, made some more wow throws, but he wasn't as consistent. Right. That one deep middle pass for the touchdown. What impressed me the most is if you watch the replay, the ball was out of his hands before the receiver made his break.
Correct.
And the receiver did not have to adjust or anything. The receiver came out of break, the ball was there, boom, gone. Now, there was some inconsistencies. I talked about the Carson Beck fade corner pattern. Drew Allard does not do that as well.
He had a nice back shoulder throw right down the left sideline, though, to Wallace.
He had one in the end zone where it was a better catch than it was a pass, as opposed to say the completion that Carson Beck made in the end zone to Colby Young. Listen, I like Drew Allard. You got to remember, I mean, 4/5 of the Penn State offensive line is gone. Maybe it's 3/5 of the offensive line was gone. They were all drafted, so there's going to be some adjustment there. They don't have the greatest receivers. I like Allard. I think he's got great upside potential. I do think he's going to be a first-round pick. I think he can move up draft boards. A little bit unevenness yesterday. The one matchup that I also watched was the left tackle from Penn State, Wyatt Millam, against their pass rusher, the Penn State defensive pass rusher extraordinaire, Abdul Carter. First I'm going to say is I think that Penn State is doing themselves and Abdul Carter a disservice by putting him out of a 3-point stance because he's so explosive, because he can do so many things so well. That said, he made Millam from West Virginia look like an amateur yesterday. I mean, he could not control him.
And Tony, it's funny, if you look at the box score, he had very little production, but if you watch the game, and I watched a decent amount of it, he's beating him around the edge. He's disruptive. He was all over the place in that game.
There was that 4th and 1 where the refs gave it to him. If you remember the bad mark where West Virginia only gained a half a yard, where Abdul Carter just exploded to the inside, which created the ability for number 91 to twist around the edge and make the stop.
He took out two guys on the play.
And people are Millam is liked in the scouting community. I think he's more of a late round pick. I don't think he's going to be a left tackle in the NFL. I think he's going to be a right tackle. Abdul Carter is just fantastic. I mean, he's Micah Parsons, LeVar Arrington rolled into one. I think he's got that type of talent. I really hope, for his sake and the Nittany Lions' sake, they do more with him than just have him come out of a 3-point stance and have him come rush up the field, because he can make plays in space. He is just that special of a player.
Yeah, and the thing about Abdul Carter, you see him move, you think he's one of these like smaller 230-pound edge guys, Tony. Then you look up like, oh my gosh, he's 251 and he moves that way.
And
And
he
you're like,
looks
wow,
thin
that's
though.
pretty good.
I mean, he's not a big bulky guy. I mean,
All right.
you look at him and you think he's a smaller guy.
Yeah, but he's 251, which I think he probably plays with more power than people think. Anything else from the Penn State game? I thought the Penn State running back Singleton looked very good.
Yeah, I mean, first game, I don't think West Virginia is really that good of a team, to tell you the truth. They've got bits, they got some pieces here and there. I think they did a better job staying in the game. Really, I didn't get, except for Carter, except for Drew Alar, except for Millen, there was not a whole lot there for me.
All right, and then I sat through that whole Notre Dame game at night. Um, taking out Texas A&M, and I was both quarterbacks. I was excited to see him. Riley Leonard ran the ball really well, I thought. Notre Dame's running backs, I thought, had a couple nice moments, but otherwise, not a ton jumped out to me there, Tony.
No, I mean, Riley Leonard talked about Cam Ward, how he has really improved through the years. I don't see that with Riley Leonard. I see Riley Leonard, a good athlete who plays college quarterback, who's as good, if not better, running the ball than he is throwing the ball. He really has never improved or taken the next leap as a passer as I thought he should have 2 years ago. Yeah, he'll make some nice plays on occasion, but there's not the consistency there. And the game last night was basically won by the Notre Dame running game. It was those big runs that got them into the end zone to start off, and then late in the game, which sealed that contest for him. So, I thought Bo Collins, the receiver, the Clemson transfer, who I talked about when Bruce Feldman was on, guy I like, a guy who I think is underrated. He had some big plays for Notre Dame. I think that Shamar Turner of Texas A&M, a big athletic defensive end, he flashed. Shamar Turner is this year's version of Edgerrin Cooper, if you will. What I mean by that is, at this point in time, there weren't too many people talking about Edgerrin Cooper. I liked him. I had him as a day 2 pick. But he, even really through the process, a lot of people weren't talking about Edgerrin Cooper until right before the draft. And then he ended up as an early second round pick. I think Shamar Turner, number 5, the defensive end who can also stand up over tackle, 6'3", 289 pounds, is going to run the 4.7s. I think he's a similar type of prospect in that no one's talking about him, but all of a sudden, as we get into April, everybody's going to be in love with Shamar Turner.
All right, Tony, before we get to Eric Galko or anything else from the weekend from any other games that you want to bring up?
No, I mean, Colorado had its hands full with North Dakota State. I mean, that was a fun game to watch. I like the North Dakota State left tackle.
We
Gray
should talk
Zabel.
about Travis Hunter a little bit, Tony. He was pretty spectacular.
Gray Zabel, the left tackle, I thought did a terrific job. Held his own, was not overmatched. I don't know that he's going to be a left tackle. He may have to move into a guard because he's got short arms, but I thought he did a real good job. I mean, it's going to be an interesting conversation, Travis Hunter, a wide receiver or cornerback. I think he's a much, much better wide receiver now, and he needs a lot of work at the cornerback position, but there's much more upside, and there's, a high demand at the cornerback position.
Yeah, but the salaries are bigger at the wide receiver position, which tells me he's probably going to want to play wide receiver, Tony. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. I mean, that was a fun game to watch. Unlike the Notre Dame Texas A&M game, that was a fun game to watch. I thought Shedeur Sanders played reasonably well. The one thing I like about Sanders is he's a lot like Cam Ward, that he's very poised and he's very patient. I was watching the game and I was thinking about this. Everybody fell in love with Caleb Williams because of his ability to make off-platform throws, to improvise when plays break down. Sanders does the same things, but the thing I like about Sanders is he'll ready himself. He doesn't just make the throw on the move. He'll run around. He'll buy time when things break down. He'll improvise, and then he'll reset himself, scan the field, and get the ball off, which is why I really like Sanders a lot. Colorado, I think, is going to have a tough go of it this year. A brand new offensive line, and that was their problem last year. And he was getting hounded this year. Going to be interesting to see what happens with that team. But both of those guys, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, are going to be very early picks in next April's draft.
Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risks into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, so we had a chance to talk to Eric Galko, who runs the East-West Shrine Bowl. We talked to him before the college football season started, so we don't talk about anything that's happened so far, but we talk about their watch list, what the draft class looks like, and then we're going to do the same thing next week with Jim Nagy and the Senior Bowl watch list. That is already in the can as well. And then same deal, we'll start the show. We'll kind of go through what we saw from the weekend in college football, and then we'll get to our tour interview. So this week it is Eric Galko, which we recorded about 10 days ago. And now we're joined by our guest. He is Eric Galko. I'm going to call him the head honcho of the East-West Shrine Bowl. I'm not sure what the official title is, Eric. You joined us on last year's show as well. You guys did a great job putting on a fantastic game down in Frisco, Texas. You're back again this year. Thanks for being with us, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's crazy. Every year it's a lot of work towards January, then a little bit seeing how things go in February through May, and then right back in May again, we're ready to go for this season too. So we're excited for the season to start, and Shrine Bowl 1000 list is already a month old at this point. We're ready to go for the season already.
Fourth year running the Shrine Bowl, Eric, right? It gets better and better. We're going to be back in Dallas or Frisco this year.
Yep. Yeah. Excited back in Dallas. This year, it's our 100th anniversary of the game. So we thought we'd do it big and have it at AT&T Stadium. They're in Arlington, Texas too. So I'm really excited to be back in Dallas. It's been a great location. I think Vegas, like Dallas, is a great location for media, NFL personnel, players. Obviously, being an NFL facility is really important too. And Vegas had its allures, but I think Dallas certainly is a whole different brand of where football really is the most important part of their ecosystem down there too. So great to be back in Dallas for another year this year, and hopefully for the future.
Are the practices still going to be at the Ford Center?
Yep.
Yeah.
Same last year, same hotel, same situation, same setup. Just the game will be at AT&T Stadium.
Yeah, great setup.
And that is a great setup. I mean, everyone fans go to the Senior Bowl. They should definitely check out the Shrine Bowl because that Ford Stadium it's terrific. It's a smaller stadium, but the seating is great to watch the practices. I stayed at the Players Hotel last year. It's an easy ride over. It was, more so than Vegas. It was a real scouting event last year because Vegas, there's so many peripheral things to draw your attention away, but really appreciate it. Want to start off with a question. Late in the process last year, I should say late in the season last year, the NFL made this grandiose announcement that they will now allow juniors to play in the postseason All-Star games. I think at that point last year, it didn't matter for you guys. But how do you attack that moving forward to 2025? Because I got to assume you're talking to seniors now and contacting seniors about, coming to play in your game. But you really can't talk to juniors because, you don't know what they're going to do when junior declaration day is January 15th. How do you plan that moving forward?
Yeah, so I mean, even a year ago, this had been building for a little while, and I'll tell you guys, when I first took over the Shrine Bowl, geez, you say 4 years now, it feels like not that long ago, but whenever I took over, one of my first questions to the league office was, why do we have this rule, right? It happened for so long, like why was it a thing? Why was it even a barrier? And obviously the reason was that they didn't want to incentivize juniors to come out, and my point of view was, hey, it's not about incentivizing guys to come out, it's about giving players options to consider when they look ahead. Right. And I'm a big player advocate. I always have been. It's my approach to this job. That's why our focus is having a best in class event for players. So even a year ago, I told the league office when they kind of eventually pushed it through, and I've already told them, hey, I didn't love announcing it when they did. It created a lot of confusion. And I told them a lot of people are calling myself and Jim Nagy, not calling the league office when they have questions. So it ended up being a lot of headache for people that are in our world versus in the league office's world. But the premise of it is fantastic. And I think it's what it's allowed us to do a year ago, and even more so this year, is to provide information to players, right? I believe that if you give players all the best information, not biased, not subjective, not inaccurate, they'll make the right decision for them. For some guys, that might be staying in school to improve what they can do on the field. For some guys, it might be, hey, you know what? This is a good enough reason for me to come out for the draft and take my chance. So from my point of view, we were prepared last year for underclassmen. As I expected, not that many underclassmen who were 3-year players would play in all-star games, which I think is a good sign that between NIL and players not being forced to make decisions for money purposes, as well as giving them information, telling underclassmen, hey, if you do this, you probably end up going here in the draft, and that may not be a good decision for you as well, too. So I think the benefit of this rule, along with, maybe having more talent for all-star games is really giving players more information, more ammo to know kind of where they stand going into. So it won't change our process really. We've got a big board stacked, about 750 players, including juniors on it, organized, ranked, hierarchical right now. So we're prepared no matter who comes out for the draft. But certainly it's going to be another year of, I think, agents and players still, oh yeah, I guess I can do this, and kind of educating them a little bit more.
Yeah, and Eric, it's a much different type of class last year. It was very shallow. A lot of kids went back to school for the bonus COVID year, for the NIL money, things like that. But we're getting to the point now where the extra COVID year, the extra redshirt years, they're going to run out for a lot of these guys who are some are 6-year. I think there are even some 7-year seniors out there who got a double redshirt, a triple redshirt in that matter. What does the class look like this year? Is it a lot deeper than most because we've kind of had the backlog from the COVID year pushing players
I think
back
it's
into
deeper. Yeah, I think it's deeper. I think there's, I think some people are thinking, this might be a double draft. People say that, right? It's 2 clown classes together too. And that won't happen because we'll have guys go back to school again. We'll have juniors surprisingly go back to school again too. So I think it'll be stronger. I think, for example, it's weaker on offensive line compared to last year across the board. And I think if some juniors come out, then maybe it gets a little stronger too. But overall, there may be a weaker spot. And I think a lot of other positions are really, really strong. So I think this won't be the offensive dominated draft that it was a year ago. It'll be more defensive players taken early in the draft, some really special guys at the top too. But I think it's a deeper class for sure. I think last year, coming into even the draft process, most teams felt like, hey, after the first 170, 180 guys, we're going to kind of figure out who we're going to take here. I think this year will be a little bit deeper, and teams are going to be wanting more guys in the rounds 5, 6, 7 compared to last year.
2 quick questions, and I can't get a straight answer on this. Is this the final season for the super seniors going back for COVID? I mean, is this the last year that's, you can say, hey, listen, this is my COVID year. I'm going to put it, or is this going to, do you know if it's going to extend for college players into 2025?
My understanding, this is the last year that a player who had an extra year because of COVID will have that counting on a COVID purposes, right? So if a guy redshirted before COVID and then COVID, maybe he has 1 more year left as well too. But at this point, we've kind of extinguished the 4 years since COVID, which again, hopefully should make things easier. But again, the NCAA is going to continue to be lenient on redshirt requirements and maybe lean towards guys having extra years, only play 4 in a 1 play, right? So there'll still be more opportunities for players to go back to school, surprisingly. But from a COVID standpoint, we can kind of put that in our vocabulary in the past, I hope, for a little while longer at least.
Yeah. John asked you about the class overall. I want to ask you about the quarterback position because last year when teams were trading up and all the quarterbacks were going early, people were saying, well, you better get a quarterback in 2024 because the quarterback class in 2025 is not going to be that good. I disagree with that. Yeah, we don't have a Caleb Williams at the top. We don't have a Jaden Daniels, but at this point in time last year, we didn't have Jaden Daniels. We don't know Jaden Daniels is going to be good. I look at this class. I not only like the class, I see just some incredible potential from some of these guys. I see one of the top guys on your list for the Shrine Bowl 1000 is Jalen Milroe of Alabama, who I think, if he plays to his capabilities and he's a little bit more accurate, he's just going to make a meteoric rise up draft boards.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. And I think we look at things, hey, is there a Trevor Lawrence or a Caleb Williams? And it's almost like a receiver room in the NFL. If you've got a 1, your number 2, 3, 4 look a lot better, right? If you don't have that number 1 guy, it's like, I don't know if I have a good room or not. I think it feels that way. And I'm totally with you, Tony. I think there's 3, 4, 5 guys who, if they have a kind of season and draft process, could be a first overall pick type of player. I mean, there's that much talent, I think, in this draft class, but a lot of guys have to prove it, right? Shadur Sanders at Colorado, like offensive line's got to play better. Let's see if he can really rise to the occasion, but he's super talented. Drew Allar, new offensive system. What can he do? Quinn Ewers at Texas, another playoff bound season. Maybe he's a first overall pick kind of guy. There's more and more. So I think it's a stronger, I think it's deeper of a class. You saw last year, some teams felt there were 6, maybe 7. Some teams looked at 8 guys if they were on a backup, and that was kind of fell off a cliff after that. I think this year we've got 17, 18, 19 guys who will challenge for those 12 draftable spots, maybe more at the end of the day too. And again, to your point, I think last year we thought Caleb was special. We thought Drake May was a really talented player. We thought Jaden Daniels. Let's see what happens this year. So there might be 2 or 3 Jaden Daniels this year by comparison to last year.
How has the transfer portal, Eric, helped or hurt the evaluation of some of these quarterbacks? You saw last year, guys like Michael Penix, guys like Bo Nix, guy like Jaden Daniels. They had all this extra experience in multiple systems, which I think helped their evaluation process a little bit.
Yeah, I think for all those guys you just mentioned, unless I'm mistaken, they all had 2 years in a new team and a new system,
Yep.
and that makes a big difference. So I think for one, I would say this one thing I think has been really cool overall for the transfer portal beyond just quarterbacks, and I've seen this talking to more college campuses, especially being on campus the last couple of weeks, is guys that go in the portal, they get kind of a new lease on who they are as a person to the NFL, right? When you're at a school for 4 years, that school knows the ins and outs since you were 17, 18 years old. And if you have a guy who had some ups and downs or some character issues, whatever else, it's kind of hard to truly overcome them. But you go to a new school and they're like, hey, for us, he's been incredible. He's been a pro. And I think a lot of guys have gotten a new lease on their character background by doing that. I mean, for quarterbacks, it's somewhat similar, not necessarily because the guys have negative character, but I look at a guy like, Cam Ward or DJU at Florida State, guys that are coming in with huge expectations, but they get to walk in there and take all the experience they had their last stops and kind of put that together in almost a grad school level, which is what they're doing, and saying, hey, I've already learned the answers to the test. I'm going to come here, fresh start, fresh faces, and make a real impact. So I think for guys that have a lot of experience going somewhere for a year or two, they can really use that experience to their benefit. But I think for NFL teams, it's tough. And I think for quarterbacks, it's tough too, because they're entering a new system. And in college, especially if you play a team early in the season, early in conference play, you don't get, 17 weeks, you get 12. And you really can't afford to have 3 or 4 bad weeks to start in a new scheme. So I think quarterbacks, it's really tough to transfer and play year one. But I think college teams are doing a better job of helping these guys set up for success. But hey, for guys like Cam or DJ or many others, they got to play well week 1, week 0, and they can't afford to wait till week 4 to week 5 to figure things out.
Tony, I want to follow up on the quarterbacks real quick, Tony. Just one question. Age-wise, I know a lot of times when people get drafted, Eric, they're like, oh, he's a 23-year-old prospect. I'm not really excited about that. Do NFL teams view it the same way for quarterbacks, though? Because to me, if you're getting more of a finished product at quarterback that has all these extra snaps, all this extra experience, for me, that to me is a positive. How do NFL view quarterbacks that come out as older players versus guys at other positions?
I would say NFL teams differ. I think the collective wisdom, in part because they were forced to because of COVID a couple of years ago, they've learned to be like, okay, we're okay with this. We don't need age as much. My personal philosophy is offensive line and quarterback, and even defensive back, corner especially, shouldn't matter, right? We call offensive line and corner preventer positions, meaning your job is to prevent bad things from happening. In some ways, that's also the quarterback spot too, and that comes with age. And I got a chance to work with Duke Manyweather and talk to him a little bit when I was at the XFL, 4 years ago now, about how do we have good offensive line play even for an XFL type league. You don't want the upside guys. You want guys who have played a lot of football, have seen a lot of things, and gotten better there too. So I think from the quarterback standpoint, age is it's more a testament of like upside and talent. But man, a guy played 4 seasons in college. You kind of understand now, especially with how easy some throws are in the NFL and how hard some throws are in the NFL with between RPOs and now downfield stuff. You see why Bill Parcells had that 3-year starter rule coming out. I think it's coming back in vogue now because NFL teams just see if we get a high floor, high IQ, experienced quarterback like a Brock Purdy, it's easy for our offense to have success if we have a guy with a high floor like that.
I just want to go back to your point. You talk about Penix and Bo Nix, 2 guys being transfers who were in the system for 2 years, and then you got to have a guy like Sam Hartman, who really did not do a good job at Notre Dame last year. Probably had his play better when he was at Wake Forest. I want to talk about 2 edge rushers that you have on your list coming out of Baylor. Steve Linton started at Syracuse, went to Texas Tech, is now finishing up his career at Baylor. A guy that's athletic, but a guy that struggled with injuries, and he's a very athletic guy, not just an edge rusher, can play off the line of scrimmage. And then someone he's going to be playing with this year, Garmin Randolph. I know you can't say it, but I'll say it. Looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. I mean, this guy's got the computer numbers that blows you away. He'll make a wild play once in a while, yet there's no consistency in his game.
I think it's important for those 2 type of guys. They're 2 great examples of guys that if they didn't play this college season, or didn't play their whole college career and just went to the combine, you'd be like, this guy has so much talent. And I think both those players would even tell you a lot of meat in the bone left to get better. And I think for both those guys and for edge rushers in general is the athleticism matters a lot. Maybe more than anything else, right? It's a weird scouting aspect, but like as an edge rusher, you've got to be a really impressive athlete to be successful. But if you can't finish in the backfield, I think Steve Linton, a couple games last year where off the snap looks awesome, gets eaten up by a 6'3", 6'4" offensive tackle in space, right? Hey, that can't happen when you're that tall, that athletic. I think Garmin Randolph, same thing. Bull in a china shop, comes downhill, can adjust, can't finish on the quarterback. And I think for edge rushers like those 2 guys, putting together a 7-8 sack season, even if 4 of those sacks are against an FCS team, show NFL teams you can finish in the backfield. Because if you can just show you can finish and have some production as a tackle for loss or sack guy with their athletic traits, teams will bet on those and say, hey, at the worst case, I'll put Steve on my practice squad for a year. He'll give my offensive line havoc and then see what he is after a year. But I think for both those guys, the ceiling is super high, Tony. You're dead right. But both those guys need to have a 5, 6, 7, ideally an 8+ sack season to really reach their potential in the NFL.
Yeah, I want to stick on the edge rushers here, Eric. One guy I really liked is another transfer, Nick Scorton, who's going from Purdue to Texas A&M. I think you watch his tape at Purdue last year. He has the athleticism and the strength and the power. Look, he's 260. He's not one of these like 240-pound, converted linebackers to an edge player. Your take on him and what you think he can do in a new spot in Texas A&M. And then I think you kind of reference this in reference to the first question. Do you consider edge the strength of this draft class? We can have one edge guy go in the top 10 last year. I think you can have 3 or 4 maybe go this year.
Yeah, we have a lot of edge guys. I think a lot of interior defensive line players too. Those are 2 of the stronger spots in this year's draft class. On Nick, I think his athleticism, playing space, but also ability to win in the B gap and penetrate as a run defender, as a pass rusher, kind of allows him to be really opened up there. He's going to benefit a lot from a really strong interior defensive line group at Texas A&M. That's one area that I think is sometimes underappreciated, is that when you've got great D tackle, especially in college, you can be more freewheeling and aggressive as a pass rusher when you don't have to worry about the B gap or the A gap as much as other guys have to. So I think for Nick, he'll be able to play even more loose, even more creative as an edge rusher at AM, but super, super talented, has first-round traits for sure. We'll see if he puts together this year. I think edge is a really strong class, though. I think the edge rusher position, the defensive tackle spot, were 2 spots not very strong a year ago. I know from our point of view, hey, are there 15, 16 edge rushers that could be draft picks? Hey, at D tackle, are there 17, 18 guys that we feel confident are draft picks? And we know based off history, those teams each have in the 20s in terms of overall drafted players. But when teams are really struggling to find those guys, it gets tough. In this year's class, if you need D-line help, you'll have plenty of options, not only in rounds 1, 2, 3, but 4, 5, 6, 7 this year for sure.
I want to go to the cornerback class for a second. I mean, last year's cornerback class at the Shrine Bowl was outstanding. I mean, you had the 2 kids from Florida State who, just knocked everybody out, and then you had Quintez Stiggers from the CFL,
the Toronto Argonauts,
exactly. By way of Division I AA school, and John and I were there all 3 days watching Stiggers just shut everybody down. Who are some of the guys on your list that people were not talking about now? They probably won't talk about too much, during the season. Then we'll go to Shrine Bowl practice and just blow it up. So Eric Galko can say, "See, I told you."
Well, I wish I knew who A is going to be in this year's draft class and who's going to be at the Shrine Bowl this year. It'd make my life a lot easier. But I think I would say it's even last year with guys like Miles Harden, who had a great week of practice and great college film, and he's now going to be the starting nickel in Cleveland despite being a 6th-round pick. And there are more guys that I think when later on draft, I thought did a great job in week of practice and was a big fan of as well too. I think from just overall, just naming some players, not just dodging the question, I think Virginia Tech's defensive back room is outstanding. They've got Dorian Strong, they've got Dean, they've got Jalen Stroman at safety as well too. Really strong group. I'm excited to go down to a Virginia Tech game and see those guys in person as well. The Kansas duo, Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson. I know Kansas is not known for being a big DB hub. We had Kenny Logan a year ago from Kansas, but both those guys are really strong. I think that Kansas defense is going to be really talented this year for sure. And then Ohio State. Ohio State, talking to even scouts have been through there. They've got 3 corners. And none of them may be nickels in the NFL. 3 outside level corners who are all draft picks this year in the draft. We'll see who comes out or not too. So I think those are the 3 schools I'll be looking for some of the top DB talent. But that Virginia Tech team, a lot of talent in that receiver room, DB room, and much more as well too.
Eric, we always joke on this show that all these really athletic kids want to go be wide receivers, where you got wide receiver rooms that are 4 or 5 players deep, where 5 could start on a lot of other teams. Are we finally seeing some of these kids get wise and say, you know what, I'm going to go play corner instead because I could be like the 2nd best corner on the team and get drafted in the 2nd round rather than being like wide receiver, 14 on the board?
I was always surprised when more guys didn't want to be DBs after Darrelle Revis. I thought Revis was an icon in the NFL when he played. He was so dominant. I thought, hey, I want to go be a corner and shut these guys down. Maybe it's a Sauce Gardner effect, but I totally agree. I think more and more guys want to play corner, and I think teams have realized, hey, especially in the college level now too, as it trickled back down, hey, there's too many big, long, athletic receivers. We got to find big, long, athletic corners, and not just guys who are too stiff to play receiver, guys who are on their own right, really, really impressive, really athletic. And I think this draft class has a good number of guys who are 6'1" and above at corner, who are outside guys. Again, in the past, it was these stiff, high-cut guys that couldn't play receiver. More and more really impressive at receiver. And hey, I think part of that too is salaries at corner going up. We saw a lot of guys this offseason get more and more, and it's not quite receiver level money, but it's getting there pretty quickly too, and it makes sense. You're defending these guys who are making $30 million a year. I want to make $30 million a year too. So it's a really strong cornerback class. Guys at the top like Travis Hunter, Will Johnson, among others, but I think the depth here is pretty strong, and again, a lot more size this year than in recent years.
No, if you make $30 million a year, make sure you send some my way and John's way as well. We'll appreciate that. You talked about the strong defensive back room at Virginia Tech. Miami of Florida's got some decent receivers. Restrepo returns. He's more of a slot guy, return specialist. Sam Brown from Houston, a guy that no one talks about, transferred over there. He's a well-built receiver, very natural, very fluid, good eye-hand coordination. I mean, and these are two guys that are on your list.
Yeah, and Jacoby George, their receiver as well too, who's really impressive. Slot Z guy who could be really impressive downfield too. I think Sam Brown is funny. I think I tweeted about Sam Brown a couple of weeks ago, and I don't check my mentions too often. I saw there, I think I put in the tweet that he was a highly recruited player in the transfer portal. I just assumed he was. He's a talented player at Houston, West Virginia. I guess he wasn't really well known in the meantime, but you're dead right, Tony. He's got maybe the most easy projected upside of those three guys because he has the size, the outside ability, can play probably gunner and special teams pretty quickly as well too. But I think he'll be a really important piece of that offense vertically, really impressive vertical receiver with that size, ability to play downfield, that physical nature. He'll be their vertical guy. I think Xavier Restrepo, one of the most reliable, probably third down or second and long receivers you can ask for. I think he fits perfectly with what Cam Ward wants to do as an improviser, look downfield, attack, and hit Restrepo. And then Jacoby George, you kind of passively mentioned him as well too, but one of the most impressive, twitchy route runners in the country from a Z or slot receiver. When he's on and he's feeling comfortable in the offense, he can really get separation as well as anybody in the country. There are flashes a year ago where he looks like Tank Dell out there at times with how much separation he can get as quickly as he could too. So it's a really good three wide receiver set. I think all those guys have a great chance to be drafted. And I think there's between those three and Damian Martinez, that running back from Miami, and that offensive line, that Miami offense could be pretty fun this year, but up to see if they can make it work with Cam Ward.
Yeah, I've got two questions on the wide receivers. The first one, Eric, I want to talk about Ole Miss, Trey Harris. He's a guy that we kind of talked a little about last year too.
Yeah.
And I just think that offense is going to be so good. I mean, I looked at your watches. I think you have 20 Ole Miss players on it.
So many.
They have a good quarterback. They had a lot of transfers. They have a good offensive system there. Charlie Weiss's kid is calling the offense there. I just think that, the old tide lifting all boats thing, I think that offense is going to be so good that we're going to see a lot of Ole Miss players go in this draft.
No doubt. And they've done a great job in the I think they added 18 players in the portal that are on their 2-deep depth chart. So they've got a ton of depth there as well, too. And it's one of those things where I think some teams were saying, oh, is that too many guys? I think those practices at Ole Miss have been great so far this camp, right? It's good on good. It's 20 guys, 22 guys in their 2-deep who think they're NFL players now or in the near future. I think that's great for competition. All those guys will get a lot better, and those practices have been outstanding so far. You mentioned Trey Harris, a guy that I think could come out a year ago, would have been a 3rd, 4th round pick at worst, could be higher. I think number one receiver in that offense with a guy like Jackson Dart, who I got a chance to see at Manning Passing Academy, and that arm is real. He's gotten better as a pocket navigator. He's better off balance and moving to his left than he was even a year ago too. So between Jackson, Trey Harris, the depth in that offensive line, one of the best in the SEC probably this year in terms of depth. If they lose one or two guys, they're okay, but a lot of front-end talent there as well. And the running back room is still going to be strong. Even with Quashad Junkins leaving, they've got 2 or 3 guys there. They'll be impressive as well, too. So I would say Ole Miss is the deepest team in college football this year. And they have the upper-level talent as well, too. I think in terms of the upper-level guys, how many, blue-chip, future first, second-round guys, maybe the Georgias of them haven't beat, but Ole Miss is going to have a lot of staying power this entire season. And SEC play, you've got to have depth win the SEC, and I think they have the most of any team in the country this year.
All right, my second question on the wide receivers, real quick. We're not going to see a lot of classes with 3 top 10 wide receivers like last year, and 3 guys that could have been top 5 wide receivers, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So we're not going to have that in this year's class. But are we ever really going to see classes that don't have good wide receiver depth anymore? With all these teams that are throwing it, all these players that play wide receiver, 7-on-7, all that sort of stuff. Are we ever going to have a class where we're like, yeah, this is a pretty weak wide receiver class? I just haven't seen one in what seems like forever.
we've got to be getting close, at least to the point where receivers almost become devalued, because it feels like every year there's 4 or 5 guys, plus there's a handful of day 2 picks and day 3 picks. I mentioned Tank Dell earlier, right? Like Tank Dell
Yeah.
was a 4th-round pick, and he's the Texans' number 3 receiver this year, right? It's unbelievable.
Dude,
So
Troy Franklin went in the 4th round last year. The guy had 1,500 receiving yards at Oregon. It was ridiculous.
right, 100%. So I think there's going to be maybe a change in evaluation, but this year is not going to be weak either at receiver, right? I mean, Luther Burden leads the way, but there's plenty of depth. If you call Travis Hunter a receiver, which I think he's both, I think he's a receiver and a corner, and he's the best. He's probably the number 2 or 3 ranked receiver, a number 1 clearly rest corner in the country, and he might be number 1 at both those by the end of the season as well too. We'll have more guys this year as well too, and I think the logic goes is like, hey, there's still teams lacking a number 1, number 2 receiver, but you're dead right, John. We've had too many good years in a row of incredible receiver talent, and I think that's going to keep coming this year too.
That's also a reflection of the college game, because the college game is so widespread and pass happy oriented. They just put the best athlete, a lot of the best athletes at the wide receiver position. It just translates to the NFL. You were talking about Mississippi before. The funny thing about Mississippi is if you look at their transfer portal, they raided so many other SEC schools and brought players in. Another school that's pretty deep, I would expect to see a lot of representation at the Shrine Bowl, also did a good job in the transfer portal, are the Oregon Ducks. I mean, potential top talent in Connerly and Jordan Birch, but I mean, a lot of depth there, good running backs. And I would expect to see a lot of those guys, or at least a few of those guys, in Frisco in January.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Birch is a guy that almost came out a year ago, super talented defensive lineman, could be a versatile guy. Johnny Cornelius, another offensive lineman who transferred there a year ago. Now it's his 2nd year in that offense. Really talented offensive lineman too. I'll tell you the one guy, you mentioned all the talent they have on the offensive line. Connolly's a great player. Johnny Cornelius, I mentioned the running backs. I'm excited to see what the quarterback does. I think it's people have kind of, Dylan Gabriel's got a little bit of, I dare to compare him to Brock Purdy because he's the holy grail at the Shrine Bowl here now. But Dylan's played a lot of football. He's played in different offenses and had success in a lot of spaces. And Dylan Gabriel is going to walk into an Oregon offense that has plenty of talent, but he's going to be the one in control and in charge. And again, seeing him rewatching this film after a year ago, last year he was kind of locked in on the transfer portal, so we didn't really consider him for the Shrine Bowl too much. We obviously spoke with him and the team, but he was kind of wanting to go someplace else, which was a big move, and Oregon's going to be a hell of a team this year. But I think the way people are going to talk about him as like, oh, Dylan Gabriel, been around for a while, good college quarterback, whatever else. And I think people need to wake up a little bit that he might be a real NFL quarterback as well too.
Yeah, and he's going to dictate, I believe he'll dictate how well or how not as good that Oregon does, because you got to come out of the gate hot. And I agree with you. I mean, I've got a late round grade. I know I've talked to scouts. They say free agent, but not the biggest guy in the world, but the mind. I mean, he just sees it. He understands what's going on. He doesn't make bad decisions.
No doubt.
All right, you want to go defensive tackle, Eric? You mentioned that as being one of the stronger positions in the class.
Yeah.
And look, you don't get defensive tackles. We could have 3 in the top 10 here this year, I think. Everyone talks about the 2 Michigan guys. They've had so many good defensive linemen come out. These might be their 2 best, at least inside, coming out this year. And then you watch Deion Walker from Kentucky play. And I get the pleasure of watching Dexter Lawrence here every day, so I understand the gravity of the statement about to make. That dude is as big and moves as well as Dexter Lawrence does. And big guys that size are not supposed to move like that.
Yeah, the 2 Michigan guys and Walker, all a little bit different, but no doubt on Walker. And I think, again, you have the experience of seeing it, just how impactful someone who can dominate the A gap on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd down. I mean, it's so hard to find. It's so important. Again, I know a couple of years ago, we've had D tackles from the Shrine Bowl that go 3rd, 4th, 5th round. And people are like, wow, that feels really high. It's like, you just can't find humans that big that can move like that. And Lawrence, obviously a unicorn in that way too, but Walker's the same way. I think Walker is so athletic, he can play in the B gap and maybe move outside situationally too. It can really penetrate and finish upfield too. But I think that the need, the last year not being the best, that might be the best spot in the draft and defensive tackle. I think that's where teams want to overcorrect there. But Mason Graham, incredible production his whole college career. He's been a guy they knew at Michigan like day 1 of his freshman year. Like, oh man, we got a guy here. They knew so quickly on how he's doing in practice. So between Graham, Walker, Grant, super impressive. Tyleik Williams. Another impressive guy could play interior as well too. Florida State's got a whole bunch of defensive tackles and defensive linemen too. It's a really strong defensive tackle class at the top. And then again, we're stacking our board and we're kind of expecting, hey, who are the 20, 25 guys may want to consider. And we've got more than 25 guys we like at D tackle this year, which is a big far cry from a year ago when it was, hey, 18, 19, 20 guys maybe can make it. This is the 25 plus kind of depth at defensive tackle, which is huge.
I'm going to mention a guy at that position that a lot of people don't talk about. I love talking about him the year before they're ready to bust out. And this guy's ready to bust out. I watched him as a sophomore at Iowa, made progress in his game last year. Yahya Black. I mean, 6'5.5", 333 pounds, very athletic, more than a gap occupier. On your list, on your list is one of the top Iowa guys for the Shrine Bowl.
No doubt. Track star in high school, super impressive athlete in high school as well, too. I think he is going to benefit from, we saw him last year. We had Logan Lee at the Shrine Bowl a year ago. Talked to Logan quite a bit about kind of impressive Yahya can be as a playmaker, and a guy who could play again. He can play outside on sub packages, can play inside, can penetrate upfield as well too. But I think he'll be one of the more higher athletic testing defensive tackles in this year's draft class. And we could have some real freaks this year at defensive tackle in terms of guys, wouldn't say challenging Aaron Donald, Kobe Turner, but could be really impressive in different ways. And he'll be one of those guys for sure.
Just to understand how impressive this is, Tony did not give Eric any of these names before we started this. He's just picking out like random guys from schools, and Eric
and in no order too. We're going DBs. We're going. I love it. Tony.
Eric's just
you keep my toes every year.
It's very impressive. I want to go to running back. We did not get a running back until late second round last year, Eric. And are we going to have a little bit of a better class this year? Where first round maybe not. That's fine, but are we going to see some more really explosive years? You mentioned the transfer to Ohio State. Boise's got a really good running back that I like.
Yeah.
So are we going to see that class pop a little bit more at that position this year, you think?
We could. I think there's some really top end guys that are talented. The two Ohio State running backs, Henderson, who's well known by scouts. Again, maybe not a first round at all type of guy, but a guy NFL teams know very well. Judkins, super impressive. Ollie Gordon, Doak Walker, a year ago. He's super talented. Damon Martinez at Miami, I mentioned I'm pretty confident he was the top guy in the portal at running back who ended up Miami as well, and he'll benefit from that offense. So Amarian Hampton up for the Doak Walker award as well this year too. So we have some of the more top end juniors, and we'll see if they all come out for the draft and declare. I think this depth is about the same as a year ago. And I think one of the thing about running back evaluations these days, and I tell people that it's in my opinion, one of the easier, not that scouting's ever easy, one of the easier ones to evaluate in terms of their draft ability, because you can't just be a good running back in the NFL anymore, right? To be a prospect, you got to have either elite production, athleticism, but if you have all five tools of production, size, athleticism, pass blocking, and pass catching, you're Bijan Robinson. But beyond that, the guys like Tyrone Tracy, right? Hey, he's tough, he's well built, and he's an elite pass catcher. Those three traits are more than enough to be a good NFL running back now versus guys that may be like I want to name names, but guys that have really good college careers that don't add things on third down or aren't really good athletes. So I think we're starting to see a better, perspective on scouting these running backs. And for us, hey, there's a lot of really good pass catchers in this draft class. Hey, there's a couple good, really special pass blockers in this draft class. And hey, there's some really freak athletes. So from our point of view, there's plenty of running back talent. I just think people need to kind of adjust how they evaluate the running back position, because if you look at it from what role can they play in a room, there's a lot of talent in terms of, hey, how many guys can have 1,500 yards this year in college football? Not too many.
Go to the tight end position. I mean, we've got a couple of juniors who are really good, could move up draft boards. People love those the guys who run the 4-4, the 4-5s, get down the field. I like the guys that are 3-down players at that position, and it looks like we've got a bunch of them, especially some guys who are returning from injury.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the strong positions in the draft class. I think last year's tight end group kind of fell off a little bit towards the back end, but I think NFL teams are pretty bullish. Two guys from Georgia, Oscar Delp and Ben Jurasik, coming on from Stanford too. We'll see how those two guys kind of make up for Brock Bowers being gone. I think South Carolina has two interesting guys. One a transfer 2 years ago, Josh Simon. The other one, Brady Hunt from Mac School. How those two tight ends play together as well too. I think to your point, even more and more college teams are seeing, hey, if we get two tight ends who can kind of block and be really good athletes at receiver, we could be really dynamic and versatile offense. So you've got your freak athletes, Amari Niblack, Colson Loveland, obviously probably the presumptive top tight end in this draft class, but depth is really there this year for NFL teams needing tight ends. And I think to your point, more and more teams are realizing, hey, getting 11 personnel guys who can block and be on the field consistently, like in the NFL, you have those guys, you can run more up-tempo stuff and not shrink your playbook. I think more and more teams are leveraging those quality blocking, receiving tight ends to play in their offense in college now too.
All right, Eric, I'm going to throw a name at you here. Going back to running back real quick. Why doesn't Travis Etienne's brother, Trevor, who transferred to Georgia this year, why doesn't he get more love? I know he was a part-time guy in Florida last year. He shared time with a bigger back. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but whenever he got the ball, that dude was explosive and he was a big play waiting to happen. I think in Georgia, he could be dynamite this year.
And he'll be the guy this year at Georgia, too. I mean, he'll be the most talented guy in that room, I think, but they've always got a freshman I may not have heard about yet. Ends up being the next, Torrey Gurley or whoever, too. But no, he's super talented. I'm sometimes, people always ask me who's an underrated guy you like, and I'm bad at that because we lock in on our scouting process, and that's about it. And I'll tell you, Trevor Etienne is not a nobody on our board either. He's on our board among other guys I mentioned at running back for sure, too. But at the Georgia offense, they've got a loaded offensive line. I think they have 3, maybe 4 guys returning on the starting offensive line, and they have depth behind them as well, too. An experienced quarterback like Carson Beck, plenty of receivers to threaten the safeties downfield. I think Trevor could really eat in that offense this year.
John, you'll be happy to know Trevor Etienne is the number 1 back on my board right now before the season starts.
I like that, Tony. I like it.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the linebacker position, not the pass rushers, the off-the-ball guys. And, too many times they want to broad rush guys as edge rushers. Barrett Carter, Danny Stutzman, Jamin Johnson, Sam Mondon of Georgia. A lot of good, 3-down linebackers that people aren't going to take notice of because they're not always in the opponent's backfield disrupting the action.
Yeah, and I think it's been a fairly weak draft last couple of years at those spots, in part because teams feel like that position, like running back, you can find guys after the draft. Right. And to that argument's point, Jack Sanborn playing the Shrine Bowl 2 years ago, Ivan Pace a year ago, undrafted guys that start, you can find those linebackers maybe in the undrafted area too. But I think this draft class is probably better than the last couple of years, especially if the juniors come out as well too. I think Danny, Barrett Carter, both awesome players. Smile Mondon, Dumas Johnson, great player as well too. One player I'll call out who I think, and I'm going to do my best to make sure he's not underappreciated because he had, I think, 14,000 tackles last year. Nick Martin, Oklahoma State. Just so productive. Yeah. And we saw it a couple of years ago with the linebacker. I'm forgetting his name. I apologize. From there a couple of years ago, who was super talented and went late in the draft or after the draft and ended up starting the NFL. Nick Martin, the same way. He's incredibly instinctive, finishes upfield, plays outside the tackle box in the backfield as well too. He doesn't have any fake tackles on his resume. He's a guy leading the charge in that defense, and he's gotten so much better during the last year. And what I've talked to scouts so far in camp, better in coverage as well too. And with that kind of versatility to be a coverage guy in cover 2, cover 3, as well as powerful as he is, he's not going to be. He's a little undersized, about 6 feet and 230 pounds ish, but may not be the 6'2", 6'3" guys that NFL teams dream of. But we got to get past the need for size. In today's NFL, explosiveness, reaction, twitch is what teams need from their Mike linebacker. Nick Martin's a great candidate for that.
Yeah, and the Oklahoma State, when you think of them, you think of the downfield passing game, you think of an explosive offense. They not only have Martin, they got Colin Oliver, who's another, right, very athletic 3-down type linebacker. So it should be a fun defense to watch just from an NFL prospect point of view.
No doubt.
Offensive line, one position we haven't hit yet, Eric. Last position out of me, and then I have a couple general college football questions for you before we wrap. Last year, historically good offensive line class, bunch of offensive tackles in the first round. We might have 3 offensive tackles. Look at Texas, look at LSU, go near the top of the draft, Texas and top of the draft this year. But I imagine this is probably not going to be nearly as deep of a class, correct?
Yeah, it won't be as deep. But I think the question teams are going to want to see is who rises up to be that starter level player. There's a lot of guys in this class that we're excited about seeing take that next step if they can develop further. They got the athletic traits. They've got maybe 1 year of starting experience, but not as many high floor guys right now as guys that, especially at tackle, that you can say, hey, this guy can start in the NFL next year. Couple juniors will be watching, couple seniors see they can get that next step as well too. But I think the only guy I think about that I think maybe should be getting closer to that top tier of offensive linemen is a guy West Virginia, Wyatt Millam. He is a experienced, really impressive offensive tackle, grades out super well in our analytic process as well as the eye test. Watching him really impressive as well too. And he kind of flirted with coming out a year ago. He's got that type of NFL interest already too. Don't be surprised in kind of a lackluster offensive tackle class if he rises up to be that 4th or 5th offensive tackle goes in the first round as well too. But I think after some of the guys you mentioned, maybe 1 or 2 more, and I think Millam, it's going to be a little bit of a wait and see who can really emerge and be a top 100 pick at offensive tackle.
I'll stick at offensive tackle. I mentioned Garmin Randolph of Baylor before as a guy who looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane at times. Anthony Belton, North Carolina State. I mean, this guy's got the measurables. He's athletic. He's massive. if he puts it together, this is
Yeah.
another offensive tackle I believe could make a big move up draft boards.
No doubt. Belton is extremely talented. I think the important thing for Belton, it goes back to what I said earlier about the preventer position, where at offensive tackle, if you play 45 snaps and you have 42 awesome ones and 3 bad ones, and those 3 bad ones are 3 sacks, you had a bad game. And I think for Belton, 42 snaps in the season, you think he is Walter Jones, right? He's that impressive of an athlete and playing space. I think there's some lapses in judgment. I think there's some scheme things that have been worked out this offseason as well, too. But Belton, I think if you put a highlight on, you'll say he's the first overall pick in the draft. I don't care who's playing quarterback. But I think for Belton, like to your point, Tony, putting it all together this year, he's got that talent. He's a high football IQ, smart kid as well, too. I think there's a good chance he puts it all together this year and ends up being that guy that I think rises up draft boards pretty quickly. But again, NFL teams know who he is and they know the talent. Doesn't have to prove that to anybody at all. He's got to prove he can be consistent all season long.
Eric, just generally speaking, this to me is a big sea change year in college football, right? You have Washington, who went to the national title game, new head coach. Nick Saban, no longer at Alabama. They bring Washington over, new head coach. Jim Harbaugh, not at Michigan, new head coach. There's a lot of changes going on in college football here. How do you think those big changes at those impactful programs might impact what we see from the class this year and just generally in college football?
Yeah, you got Cal and the ACC. I mean, things are out of whack here entirely in college football. Stanford too. I can't figure things out at all. So no, I think it feels between the fact that the transfer portal has really come into focus and teams are really good teams are able to become great much easier than in the past, right? It was really hard for teams to get to that Georgia, Alabama, LSU level. I think now with the transfer portal, Ole Miss has gotten to that point pretty quickly too, and the turnover at some major programs. Again, I think Alabama, mentioned Jalen Milroe. They've got a lot of talent. They could be the best team in the country this year, but new head coach, again, you can't in college football like you can in the NFL. You can't like stumble out of the gates at all and still be a national title contender. So I think between the changes that you mentioned at Michigan, Washington, and Alabama, as well as now the college football playoff coming into effect, where now there's more teams who can get there. The teams like, I listened to somebody the other day who said that Wisconsin would have been in the playoffs 7 of the last 12 years had they had this playoff structure they do now, right? So teams like that we kind of forget about because they weren't one of the final 4 or final 2, but they had really good seasons. They may come into focus too. So I think it's gonna be a really fun mix this year. I don't know how I feel about the 12-team playoff quite yet. Maybe I'm more of a traditionalist when it comes to college football that way, but I know when it's here, I'll be really excited to see who the 7-12 matchup is, and can Penn State get over the hump and get to that spot. I'm very excited for it as well too. So it feels like it's going to be, because of the playoff as well as the portal as well as the coaching changes, probably the most wide open college season I can remember. I saw the top 10 list come out too, and I maybe disagree with 7 or 8 of them being in that top 10, because I think that I have different opinions than other people as well too. So it's one of the deeper and more loaded opportunities for teams across the country to make an impact this year.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to stick on the playoff. I mean, I am a college football traditionalist. I don't like the playoffs at all because what it could do is it could exclude the games like the Michigan-Ohio State game where Ohio State is desperate for a win. Now, if they know they're going to be in the playoffs and not as desperate for a win. But my question is players. We see more and more players opting out of bowl games. It used to be just the first guys who were going to go first 3 rounds. And then last year, the last couple of years, we've seen 7th round prospects, UDFA prospects opt out of bowl games to start to prepare for the draft. Do you think there's the possibility that, the 8th ranked team or the 12th ranked team in the playoffs, a guy could say, listen, I'm out. I'm just going to start get ready for my next my next level career, start to prepare for the combine. Do you think that is a possibility?
No, I don't. I think that's one of the benefits of this. First off, I think players having the choice and it not being taboo to opt out of bowl games is great. Again, I'm a player advocate through and through. And hey, you know what? If I don't have to play this game, we're not playing for anything other than this random bowl namesake and for my head coach to feel better. I get it. Again, I think there's benefits to guys playing in bowl games that are not for the national championship. I think there are some players that have asked my opinion and I've said, yes, play, but other guys have the choice. But that's these players know, right? Every year there's Appalachian State over Michigan 2 decades ago kind of started this idea that like anybody can be anyone in college football now. And if I'm in the playoff or if I'm in, the conference championship game for the AAC, and I know that if I win this game, we had a good season, I might be able to play, 3 wins away from a national championship game, guys are definitely going to play. So that doesn't worry me at all. I think that the tradition or the lack of tradition and people staying in bowl games, I think is just fine. I do think, by the way, the rivalry games, like you said, I'm sure Ryan Day will take that game very seriously. In Michigan, Ohio State, he'll care about that quite a bit after losing the last 3 years. But I think there'll be a lot of push towards rivalry and then the playoff more and more. So what happens in the other bowl games, I'm not sure. I saw the report about how the G5 schools might make like an NIT tournament for their teams. I love that idea. I think we need to get more creative in college football versus just we've always had these bowls and they should matter and darn these kids for not playing in them. I think we got to get new incentives for these players to care, and I think players will care. But no doubt the playoff will have full participation this year for guys that can play in the playoff because you're only 1 or 2 wins away from playing for the national championship.
And look, people don't realize this. The FCS has had a playoff system for years. I mean, they've been running the playoffs on that level forever, and it works. So I'm with you. And for me, Eric, it just gives you more scouting opportunities. I mean, how much did we learn about? I'll just go 2 years ago with C.J. Stroud playing in the national title game. We saw him do stuff in that game against the best competition that we had not really seen him do previously, and it could have bumped him ahead of Bryce Young. It ended up not being the case, but you learn a lot to see the best go against the best. That allows us to scout these guys a little bit more.
And one thing to kind of counterpoint your point, Tony, earlier is that for a long time, if you want to make the playoff of the national championship or a big bowl game in the SEC, you had to beat one of or both Georgia and Alabama, and for a lot of or LSU, and those teams were sometimes the best teams in the country. Now, let's say I'm Wisconsin and I couldn't beat Michigan, Ohio State, but they were the 2 best teams in the country. Well, now I'm Wisconsin. I can go beat, Georgia or Missouri to play in the national championship and get my path there a different way as well, too. So I think this opens the door for more and more teams who maybe because of the schedule and the year situation just couldn't get past that one hump, but maybe a different way to get there could be a real opportunity for some creative and really new. I'm not saying this year will be a off the wall national championship team, but I think within the next 3 years, we'll have a 8 seed or a 9 seed win the national championship. It's not crazy that'll happen. I think it'll be a pretty jarring moment when it happens, but I'm excited for Memphis to win the national championship in 3 years because they had a good run in the AAC and they just got hot and they had the right team. Who knows? And that's more of a possibility now than it ever was before.
Tony, got anything else for Eric?
That's it for me.
All right, Eric.
No specialist, John. That's it.
Yeah, did you have any punters or field goal kickers? How about some long snappers?
Yeah, we'll save that for next appearance. We'll save that for next appearance.
Talk about those long snappers.
There you go.
So, Eric, tell the folks everything you're doing with East West Shrine, where they can find the 1,000, your social media, whatever you want them to know about.
Yeah, we're excited. We've had a lot of growth in my last 3 years of the Shrine Bowl from not just a draft pick standpoint, but I think from media and agents. I think players really appreciate it too. So we're excited for a big jump this year as well. Follow online, shrinebowl.com, @ShrineBowl, my Twitter account, @Eric Galko. A lot of Shrine Bowl information as well as just general draft coverage all year long. But we're excited to be back in Dallas this year. Another big year for the Shrine Bowl this year. Appreciate you guys having me on.
No problem. Happy to do, Eric. It's always good to talk to you about these draft prospects, learning about your scouting process and how you view these guys moving forward. Always fun to talk with you. That's all the time we have today for draft season, brought to you by Moody's. For Eric Galko and Tony Pauline, I am John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time, everybody.